The thing about being 73 is that everyone assumes you're already dead. Not literally, of course, though sometimes I wonder if they'd notice the difference. They see the wrinkles, the careful way I navigate stairs, the reading glasses hanging from a chain around my neck, and they file me away under irrelevant. Which is exactly why what happened at the Riverside Community Center last Saturday night caught everyone so off guard, including me, if I'm being honest. My name is Walter, and I'm about to tell you how I accidentally became the most viral video in the tri-state area. Spoiler alert, it wasn't because I fell and broke a hip. The evening started innocently enough. My daughter Sarah had been pestering me for months to get out there after Helen passed. "Dad, you can't just sit in that house forever watching old westerns," she'd say, her voice carrying that particular blend of exasperation and guilt that only adult children can master. Mom wouldn't want that. She was right, of course. Helen had been the social butterfly in our marriage, dragging me to block parties and church functions for 47 years. Without her, my world had shrunk to the dimensions of our living room, the grocery store, and the occasional doctor's appointment. So when Sarah handed me the flyer for Singles and Mingles at the community center, I figured it was time to make an effort. What could go wrong? Famous last words, as they say. The community center was buzzing with activity when I arrived at 7:30. The main hall had been transformed with string lights and folding tables covered in paper tablecloths. A DJ who couldn't have been older than 25 was setting up his equipment in the corner, probably wondering what song from 1953 he should cue up first. I immediately regretted my decision. This wasn't my crowd. These weren't my people. I was reaching for my car keys when a voice behind me said, "First time." I turned to see a woman about my age, silver hair perfectly coiffed, wearing a dress that suggested she still believed in making an effort. "That obvious?" I replied. She laughed. "I'm Margaret, and yes, it's written all over your face, the same expression I had when my son convinced me to try online dating." "Walter," I said, extending my hand. "And how did that work out for you?" Let's just say I learned that Netflix and chill doesn't mean what I thought it meant. I found myself smiling for the first time in weeks. Margaret guided me through the evening's logistics. Name tags, drink tickets, and something called a mixer card that was supposed to help break the ice with conversation starters. Question number 3 was, what's your hidden talent? I stared at it for a long moment. Did I have a hidden talent? After 7 decades on this planet, shouldn't all my talents be pretty well documented by now? The evening progressed predictably. I made small talk with a retired librarian named Dorothy who corrected my grammar 3 times in 5 minutes. I listened to Frank, a former insurance salesman, explain why the Cubs would never win another World Series. I nodded politely while Beverly, a widow from 2 towns over, showed me 17 pictures of her grandchildren on her phone. It was all perfectly pleasant and completely forgettable, which is exactly what I expected. Then the music started. The young DJ, bless his heart, began with some Frank Sinatra, probably thinking he was being considerate to the demographic. A few brave couples ventured onto the makeshift dance floor, swaying gently to "The Way You Look Tonight." I watched from my folding chair, sipping lukewarm coffee and wondering if this was what the rest of my social life would look like. A series of well-intentioned but hollow attempts to fill the Helen-shaped hole in my existence. "You don't dance?" Margaret appeared beside me again, this time holding 2 fresh cups of coffee. "Not anymore," I said, accepting the cup gratefully. "My wife and I used to, but that was a long time ago." "When was the last time?" she asked, settling into the chair beside me. I had to think about it. Our 40th anniversary. Helen insisted we dance to our wedding song, even though my knees were already giving me trouble. She said if I loved her, I'd suffer through 3 minutes of Moon River. And did you? Suffer through it? Absolutely. But she was right, as usual. It was worth every creaking joint. Margaret was quiet for a moment, watching the couples on the floor. What was she like? It's a question people ask when they're trying to be kind, but it's also one of the hardest to answer. How do you distill 47 years of marriage, of shared jokes and silent understandings, of fights and reconciliations, of ordinary Tuesday mornings and extraordinary Sunday afternoons into a few sentences for a stranger. She was, I started, then stopped. She was the kind of person who could find something interesting about anyone, even insurance salesmen. Margaret laughed. That's a gift. It was. And she was always moving, always had music playing in the house, always humming something while she cooked or cleaned. She said life was too short not to have a soundtrack. The DJ transitioned to something more contemporary, and I watched as the younger attendees, and by younger, I mean anyone under 60, began to show more enthusiasm. The dance floor filled up, and the energy in the room shifted. People were laughing, taking risks, remembering what it felt like to be spontaneous. "What about you?" Margaret asked. "What was your soundtrack?" I considered the question seriously. After Helen died, I'd stopped listening to music almost entirely. It felt too connected to her, too painful to bear. But before that, what had moved me? What had made me feel alive? "Jazz," I said finally. "Big band, swing, bebop." I grew up listening to my father's records, Count Basie, Duke Ellington, Benny Goodman. When I was young, before I met Helen, I used to go to clubs in Chicago. There was this place called the Green Mill. I trailed off, lost in memories I hadn't accessed in years. The smoky rooms, the incredible musicians, the way the music seemed to lift you out of yourself and make you part of something larger. "You were a jazz fan?" Margaret said, and it wasn't quite a question. "I was a jazz dancer," I corrected, surprising myself with the admission. "Back in the day, anyway. Swing, Lindy Hop, a little bit of everything." My parents thought it was unseemly, but I couldn't help myself. When I heard that music, I had to move. Margaret's eyes widened. "No kidding? And you haven't danced since your anniversary?" "Not really. Helen and I settled into more conventional dancing after we got married. Slow dancing at wedding receptions, that sort of thing. The wild stuff was from my misspent youth. How misspent could it have been? You were dancing, not robbing banks." Tell that to my father. He thought jazz clubs were dens of iniquity. As if summoned by our conversation, the DJ's selection suddenly shifted. The opening notes of Sing, Sing, Sing filled the room, and I felt something stir in my chest that I hadn't experienced in decades. Benny Goodman's clarinet soared over Gene Krupa's driving drums, and for a moment I was 22 again, standing on the edge of a dance floor in Chicago, feeling the music in my bones. The current dancers looked confused. This wasn't their music, wasn't their rhythm. A few couples gamely tried to adapt their gentle swaying to the frenetic energy of the song, but it was like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. The music demanded more, deserved more. "Walter," Margaret said quietly, "you're tapping your foot." I looked down, surprised to discover she was right. My body was responding to the music without conscious direction, muscle memory awakening after decades of dormancy. "Old habits," I muttered, but I couldn't stop. The rhythm was infectious, pulling at something deep inside me. "You should go dance," Margaret said. "Are you insane? I'm 73 years old. I'd throw out my back, or worse." "When's the last time you felt this way about anything?" she challenged. I wanted to dismiss the question, to make some joke about feeling strongly about my morning coffee or the crossword puzzle. But the truth was, I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt truly excited about anything. The last time my body had responded to something with pure, unthinking joy. Maybe it was at Helen's funeral, when they played Moon River, and I'd felt that familiar ache of love and loss. But even that had been heavy with sadness. This was different. This was possibility. Everyone would stare. I said weakly, "They're already staring. Look around." She was right. The other attendees were watching the dance floor with expressions ranging from confusion to mild concern. The poor couples trying to dance to swing music looked like they were drowning in rhythm. "Besides," Margaret continued, "what's the worst that could happen? You embarrass yourself in front of a bunch of strangers you'll probably never see again? Walter, you're 73. At our age, embarrassment is a luxury we can't afford. The real embarrassment is wasting whatever time we have left worrying about what other people think. The song was building to its iconic climax, Krupa's drums thundering like a heartbeat. My entire body was alive with the need to move, to respond, to become part of the music the way I once had. "I don't even know if I remember how," I said, but I was already standing up. "Muscle memory?" Margaret said with a grin. "Besides, it's like riding a bicycle, except with more style." I walked toward the dance floor on legs that felt suddenly uncertain, not because of age or infirmity, but because of anticipation. The other dancers noticed me approaching and began to clear a space, probably expecting me to attempt some shuffling approximation of their gentle movements. I could see the pity in their eyes, the way they prepared to smile encouragingly at whatever pathetic display was about to unfold. That's when I realized I had a choice. I could live down to their expectations, shuffle around for a few bars, and retreat to my folding chair with my dignity more or less intact. Or I could show them, and myself, what Walter Morrison was capable of when the music was right. The clarinet hit that soaring high note, and I made my decision. I closed my eyes and let the music wash over me. Suddenly, I wasn't in a community center in suburban Illinois. I wasn't a 73-year-old widower trying to make conversation with strangers. I was back in the green mill, 22 years old, with worn leather shoes and a pocket full of dreams. The transformation wasn't gradual. One moment I was shuffling nervously at the edge of the dance floor, and the next I was moving like the intervening 50 years had never happened. My feet found the rhythm first, that distinctive swing step that's part walking, part bouncing, part flying. Then my shoulders loosened, my arms began to swing, and before I knew it, I was dancing. Really dancing. The Lindy Hop came back to me like a language I'd never forgotten, just temporarily misplaced. Triple step, rock back. The basic pattern emerged from muscle memory so deep it might have been encoded in my DNA. But this wasn't just going through the motions. This was jazz made visible, rhythm given physical form. I opened my eyes and saw the other dancers had stopped moving entirely. They stood frozen in their careful couples, watching me with expressions that ranged from shock to delight to something approaching awe. For a moment, I faltered. The weight of their attention threatened to break the spell, to remind me of my age and my circumstances and all the reasons why a man my age shouldn't be throwing himself around a dance floor like a teenager. But then I caught Margaret's eye. She was standing at the edge of the floor, hands pressed to her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks. Not tears of pity or embarrassment, but tears of recognition. She was seeing something she'd thought was lost forever. Pure, unself-conscious joy. The music swelled, and I surrendered to it completely. Swing dancing isn't just about the steps, though heaven knows there are plenty of those. It's about conversation, the way partners respond to each other, the way the music suggests possibilities and you follow where it leads. But dancing alone, improvising without a partner, requires something different. It requires you to become both the question and the answer, the call and the response. I spun, I kicked, I threw my arms wide and let the brass section lift me off the ground. My body remembered moves I hadn't attempted in decades. The Charleston kicks that had scandalized my mother, the aerial footwork that had once made me something of a sensation at the green mill. Was I moving with the same precision and energy I'd had at 22? Absolutely not. My knees creaked, my back protested, and I was breathing harder than I had in years. But here's what nobody tells you about getting older. Sometimes the imperfections make it more beautiful, not less. The slight hesitation before a particularly ambitious move, the way I adapted steps to accommodate joints that weren't as flexible as they once were, it all became part of the dance, part of the story I was telling with my body. The crowd around the dance floor was growing. Word was spreading through the community center, drawing people from other activities. I was vaguely aware of phones being pulled out, of people recording what was happening, but I couldn't bring myself to care. This moment was bigger than social media, more important than going viral. This was about reclaiming a piece of myself I'd thought was gone forever. The song began its final section, Krupa's drums building to that famous climax, and I knew I had one chance to really make a statement. In my younger days, this would have been the moment for an aerial, those spectacular moves where partners launch each other through the air in defiance of gravity and good sense. Obviously, at my age, attempting anything like that would be suicidal. But the music was demanding something spectacular, something worthy of its power and complexity. So I did what any sensible 73-year-old jazz dancer would do. I improvised. I dropped into a deep squat, lower than I'd been in years, and popped back up into a series of Charleston kicks that would have made my father roll over in his grave. I spun, arms extended, and felt the years falling away like old clothes. For the final 8 bars, I threw caution completely to the wind. I closed my eyes and let my body respond to the music without any interference from my brain, without any concern for how I looked or whether I was making a fool of myself. I became pure motion, pure response, pure joy. When the song ended, the silence was deafening. I stood in the center of the dance floor, chest heaving, suddenly aware of every eye in the room fixed on me. For a moment, I was terrified. Had I made a complete fool of myself? Had my attempt to recapture my youth simply highlighted how far I'd fallen? Then the applause started. Not the polite, encouraging clapping you might expect for an elderly person's brave but misguided attempt at dancing. This was real applause, enthusiastic and sustained. People were cheering, whistling, shouting encouragement. Margaret was the first to reach me, throwing her arms around me in a hug that nearly knocked me over. "Walter, that was incredible!" she said, and I could hear the amazement in her voice. "Where did that come from?" "I have no idea," I admitted, and it was true. The transformation had felt almost mystical, as if some younger version of myself had temporarily taken possession of my body. I just heard the music, and you became someone else entirely. She finished. Others were approaching now, offering congratulations, asking questions, wanting to know where I'd learned to move like that. But one conversation stands out in my memory, partly because of who initiated it, and partly because of what it revealed about the power of unexpected moments to change everything. A young man, couldn't have been older than 25, pushed through the crowd to reach me. I recognized him as the DJ who'd been looking so uncertain about his song choices earlier. "Sir," he said, slightly out of breath, "that was amazing. I had no idea. I mean, I was just playing that song because I thought it was old enough for this crowd, but you actually know this music." "I grew up with it," I said simply. "That was real jazz dancing," he continued, shaking his head in wonder. "I've seen videos online, but to see it in person, that was something else." "Thank you," I said, touched by his enthusiasm, "though I'm probably a little rusty." "Rusty?" he laughed. "Sir, I've been to dance competitions with people a third your age who couldn't move like that. What you just did, that was art." Art. The word hit me like a physical blow. When was the last time anyone had used that word to describe something I'd done? When was the last time I'd thought of myself as capable of creating something beautiful, something meaningful? But as I looked around at the faces surrounding me, faces lit up with delight and wonder and a kind of vicarious joy, I realized that's exactly what had happened. I'd created a moment of art, of pure human expression, in a community center in suburban Illinois. "Would you—" the DJ started, then stopped, looking uncertain. "Would you what?" I encouraged him. "Would you mind if I played more music like that? I have a whole collection of swing and big band, but I never thought anyone here would want to hear it." I glanced around at the crowd, many of whom were nodding eagerly. "I think," I said slowly, "that might be exactly what this party needs." The young DJ, his name was Marcus, I learned later, practically sprinted back to his equipment. Within minutes, the opening notes of In the Mood filled the room, and the transformation was immediate. The energy in the room shifted, became more vibrant, more alive. Some of the other attendees began attempting their own swing steps, with varying degrees of success. Margaret surprised everyone by revealing she'd taken some ballroom classes and could follow a basic Lindy hop. Even Dorothy, the grammar-correcting librarian, was moving to the rhythm with something approaching enthusiasm. But the real surprise came when an elderly gentleman I hadn't noticed earlier approached the dance floor. He was older than me, probably pushing 80, using a walker to get around. I assumed he was coming to congratulate me or share a story about his own dancing days. Instead, he parked his walker at the edge of the floor and began to move. His name was Frank, not the insurance salesman, a different Frank. And it turned out he'd been a professional dancer in the 1950s and 60s. His body might have been limited by age and arthritis, but his understanding of rhythm and movement was still perfect. What he lacked in mobility, he made up for in pure style. We ended up dancing together. An impromptu partnership between two old men who'd forgotten what it felt like to be fully alive. The crowd loved it. More importantly, I loved it. Dancing with Frank felt like coming home, like rediscovering a language I'd been fluent in but hadn't spoken for years. We complemented each other perfectly. My more acrobatic style playing off his sophisticated smoothness, his technical precision highlighting my raw enthusiasm. By the time In the Mood ended, the entire dynamic of the evening had changed. What had started as a somewhat awkward social mixer for lonely seniors had become a genuine celebration. People were talking, laughing, sharing stories about their own hidden talents and forgotten passions. The age barriers had dissolved, replaced by a shared appreciation for music, movement, and the courage it takes to be vulnerable in public. I should probably mention at this point that someone was recording the whole thing. Actually, several someones, as I discovered when Margaret showed me her phone during a break between songs. "Walter," she said, grinning, "you need to see this." The video was already up on social media, shared by someone's granddaughter who'd been visiting and happened to witness my transformation. The caption read, "This 73-year-old man just put every young dancer to shame. Watch till the end." In the 12 minutes since it had been posted, it already had hundreds of views and dozens of comments. People were sharing it, tagging their friends, adding their own captions. "Oh my God," I said, watching myself spin and kick across the small screen. "I look like someone half your age." Margaret finished. "Like someone who knows exactly who they are and isn't afraid to show it." The comments were overwhelmingly positive. Goals for when I'm older. This man is living his best life. Proof that age is just a number. Someone needs to get this man on Dancing with the Stars. I handed the phone back, not sure how I felt about my private moment of rediscovery becoming public entertainment. But as I looked around the room, at Frank still moving gracefully despite his walker, at Margaret attempting a Charleston that would have made a flapper proud, at Marcus the DJ grinning as he introduced song after song to an audience that was finally truly listening, I realized something important. This wasn't about me anymore. My moment of personal breakthrough had become something larger. Permission for everyone else to rediscover their own hidden selves, their own forgotten passions. The evening continued for another 2 hours, with me serving as an unofficial dance instructor for anyone brave enough to try. I taught basic swing steps to couples who'd been married for 40 years but had never attempted anything more adventurous than a waltz. I showed teenagers how their great-grandparents might have moved to this music. I even convinced the timid insurance salesman Frank to try a few moves, though his rhythm was admittedly questionable. But the most meaningful moment came near the end of the evening, when the music slowed down and Marcus played Moon River, mine and Helen's song. I'd been avoiding slow songs all night, afraid they'd bring back too much sadness, too many memories of what I'd lost. But when those familiar notes began, I knew I had a choice to make. I could retreat to my folding chair and let the melancholy wash over me, or I could honor Helen's memory by doing what she'd always encouraged me to do, live fully, love deeply, and never be afraid to look ridiculous in pursuit of joy. Margaret appeared beside me, extending her hand with a questioning look. "I should probably warn you," I said as I took her hand. "This song makes me emotional." "Good," she replied as we began to move together slowly. "Emotion is what makes us human. We danced to Moon River with a tenderness that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with shared understanding of loss and hope, and the courage it takes to remain open to new experiences. Around us, other couples swayed to the music, but I was barely aware of them. I was thinking about Helen, about how proud she would have been to see me letting music back into my life. About how she would have laughed at my attempt to relive my jazz club days, then insisted I teach her some of the moves I'd shown off earlier. When the song ended, Margaret squeezed my hand. "Thank you," she said simply. "For what?" "For showing us what's possible. For reminding us that we're not done yet." The evening wound down gradually, with people exchanging phone numbers and making plans for next week's gathering. Marcus asked if I'd be willing to come back as a regular dance instructor, an offer that both thrilled and terrified me. Frank, Walker Frank, not Insurance Frank, invited me to check out a jazz club in the city that still featured live music and dancing. Even Dorothy approached me before leaving, admitting that watching me dance had inspired her to sign up for the salsa classes she'd been considering for months. As I prepared to leave, Margaret walked me to my car. The parking lot was quiet now, most of the other attendees having already departed, but the energy of the evening still crackled between us. "So," she said, "how do you feel about being internet famous?" I'd been trying not to think about that aspect of the evening. Honestly, a little overwhelming. I came here tonight thinking I might make polite conversation with a few people and go home. I never expected. To rediscover who you used to be? To discover who I still am, I corrected. That's the thing that surprises me most. It wasn't like putting on an old costume or playing a role. When that music started, I didn't become someone else. I became more myself than I've been in years. Margaret nodded knowingly. Helen would be proud. I think so too, I said, and realized I truly believed it. Helen had spent our entire marriage encouraging me to take risks, to try new things, to not let fear of embarrassment keep me from fully engaging with life. Tonight had been exactly the kind of adventure she would have pushed me toward. We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, listening to the distant sound of traffic and the closer sound of Marcus packing up his equipment inside the community center. The evening had ended, but something new was beginning. I could feel it in the way my body still hummed with the memory of movement, in the way my mind was already anticipating next week's gathering, in the way the world seemed full of possibility in a way it hadn't for months. "Walter," Margaret said as I opened my car door, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." "What are you going to do with all this?" She gestured vaguely in the direction of the community center, encompassing not just the building but everything that had happened inside it. The attention, the video, the fact that you've apparently reminded half the internet that aging doesn't have to mean giving up. I considered the question seriously. A few hours ago, my biggest concern had been whether I'd make it through the evening without embarrassing myself. Now I was being asked to consider my responsibilities as an accidental internet sensation and inspiration to seniors everywhere. "I suppose," I said slowly, "I'm going to keep dancing." Just like that. Just like that. Not because of the video or the attention, but because tonight reminded me of something I'd forgotten. Life is supposed to feel good. It's supposed to include joy and music and moments when you surprise yourself with what you're capable of. I spent too many months after Helen died believing that part of my life was over. Tonight proved me wrong. Margaret smiled, an expression that managed to be both sad and hopeful. "You know, my husband died 3 years ago. I came to these things because my kids worried about me being isolated, but I never expected to actually enjoy myself. Watching you tonight, it made me remember what it feels like to be amazed by another human being. Maybe that's what we all need," I said. "To be amazed by each other more often. To look past the obvious stuff, the age, the circumstances, the assumptions, and pay attention to what people are actually capable of." "Think the video will go viral?" she asked with a grin. I laughed. God, I hope not. Though if it does, I suppose there are worse things to be famous for than reminding people that you're never too old to surprise yourself. As I drove home that night, my phone buzzing constantly, with notifications I wasn't ready to check, I found myself humming, "Sing, sing, sing, sing." My body was tired in the best possible way. the fatigue that comes from genuine exertion rather than mere existence. My knees ached, my back was stiff, and I was probably going to be sore for days. I'd never felt better. The house was dark when I pulled into the driveway, same as it had been every night for the past 8 months. But tonight, it felt different. Not empty, but quiet. Peaceful. Full of potential rather than absence. I sat in the car for a few extra minutes, phone finally silent, just enjoying the residual energy from the evening. Tomorrow, I knew, I'd have to deal with whatever attention the video had generated. I'd have to decide whether to embrace my sudden role as an inspiration to seniors or try to retreat back into anonymity. I'd have to figure out whether Marcus's offer to teach dance classes was something I actually wanted to pursue or just something that sounded good in the afterglow of a magical evening. But tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight, I was 73 years old and I had just reminded myself, and apparently a few hundred strangers on the internet, that passion doesn't have an expiration date, that muscle memory runs deeper than we imagine, that sometimes the best way to honor the people we've lost is to reclaim the parts of ourselves we thought we'd lost with them. I got out of the car and walked to my front door, still humming. Inside, I put on one of my father's old Count Basie records and poured myself a glass of the good whiskey Helen had been saving for a special occasion. If tonight wasn't special enough to qualify, nothing ever would be. As the music filled the living room, I found myself moving again, just slightly, just enough to feel connected to the rhythm. Tomorrow, I'd start figuring out what comes next. Tonight, I was going to dance in my own living room and remember what it feels like to be fully, completely, unapologetically alive.